Yeah. Well, it's like the prostitute once said. It's not the work, it's the stairs. The costumes. The costume designer for the musical company had me wear one white pearl earring and one gray pearl earring, and I do not know why. But I figured the part I played, Joanne, she drank, so one night she just mixed them up. Later on in the run, however, I was told to wear my gray pearl earring on my downstage ear. The scenery. Curtain went up one night at the Music Box Theater on West 45th Street. I played the first scene of the play, Bus Stop with Phyllis Love. No laughs, very strange. The stage manager had goofed. The curtain was up, the asbestos was down. The makeup. I hate it. I need it. The props. One night, the property man on some whodunit forgot to set a revolver underneath the husband's napkin. The husband was supposed to shoot the wife across the breakfast table. On cue, no revolver. The husband grabs a fistful of Schmucker's jam and shouts at his wife across the breakfast table, "I'm going to kill you with this poison jelly." It's a great actor. It's a lousy prop man. The audience that lifts you when you're down, not in Three Indelicate Ladies in Boston, not in the Cinepat Muldoon in Wilmington, not in Dancing in the End Zone at the Coconut Grove Playhouse, not in Woman Bites Dog at the Wilbur Theater in Philadelphia, and not in I Found April at the Trinity Playhouse in McKeesport, Pennsylvania. To mention just a few. The headaches, the heartaches, the backaches, the flops. Been there, done that, got all the T-shirts. The sheriff who escorts you out of town, well, not exactly out of town, but out of the Variety Club in Philadelphia in a flop, drunk and disorderly at 5 o'clock in the morning. Well. The opening when your heart beats like a drum, I'll drink to that, and did. The closing when the customers won't come. Shit. There's no business like show business, like no business I know. Everything about it is appealing, everything the traffic will allow. Nowhere can you get that happy feeling when you are stealing that extra bow. 1954, The Ed Sullivan Show. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, on our really big shoe, the shoe stopper from On Your Toes, Eileen Strick. At 18210 Birchcrest Drive in the suburbs of Detroit, Michigan, my mother clicked off the television set and went upstairs to bed. I'll watch it when he gets her name right. My father watched alone. There's no people like show people. They smile when they are low. Good for them. Even with a turkey that you know will fold, you may be stranded out in the cold. Still, you wouldn't trade it for a sack of gold. Try me. You have it with you? Maybe you left it in the cab. Did you leave it in the cab? Yesterday they told you you would not go far. That night you open and there you are. Next day on your dressing room, they've hung a star. There's good news and there's bad news. And there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is I have got a terrific acceptance speech for a Tony. The bad news is I've had it for 45 years. The good news is I won a Tony. The bad news is they cut the speech. Let's go. On with the... 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's get on with it. Why not get on with it? Scooby-Dooby-Dooby-Dooby. Let's get on with the show. Why not?
Let's get on with the show. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this sad but hopefully celebratory gathering to remember a man who was so impactful. I was standing backstage and trying to remember the first time I met him, and I couldn't, not because it was not memorable, but because every time you met Saul, he replaced your previous meeting with him with an even greater impact, with an even greater moment, with an even greater humor. He is a man who had, I suppose, the panache to be able to get away with the word cunt on stage and have people applaud him. I mean, how many people can you think of that? He's also a man who's making my life a little bit difficult today because MCs like myself rely on comedy to lift the mood and lighten the space, but it feels wrong today. He's also a man who, while unbelievably faithful to the culture of his birth and inheritance, that of being Jewish, he was also an atheist, so I can't rely on scripture. So it's only apt that I go back to my Standard 8 set work in 1992. Romeo and Juliet was a Shakespearean piece, and in Act 3, Scene 2, while waiting for Romeo to come to her, Juliet is met by her nurse, delivering the news that a cousin had been killed in a duel by Romeo. Look at me trying to explain Shakespeare to thespians. This is what Juliet says: "When he shall die, take him and cut him out in little stars, and he will make the face of heaven so fine that all the world will be in love with night and pay no worship to the garish sun." Juliet was naive when she was saying that of Romeo. I think all of us here can say that with pride and look up at night at the twinkling stars where perhaps, just perhaps, Saul finds himself. It was John Irving in a prayer for Owen Meany who reflects on death of a loved one, particularly when you were not expecting it. Don't get me wrong, Saul was no spring chicken, but I don't think any one of us expected the news that were delivered to us last week. John Irving writes of how when you lose someone you love so unexpectedly, you don't lose them all at once. You lose them a piece at a time. In the piece, he references a scent that fades from the pillows and even from the clothes that are in the closet and drawers. Gradually, he writes, you accumulate the parts, and I'll change the pronoun here, of him that are gone, just when the day comes when there's a particular missing part that overwhelms you with the feeling that he's gone forever. There comes another day and another specifically missing part. We invite you this afternoon to journey with us over the next hour or so as we pay tribute to a man who was a perfectionist in his skill, his craft, his gift, and shared it so generously with all of us who adored theater. We invite you to remember a man who was witty and humorous and funny and honest. I don't think I've ever come across a person more honest than Saul Radomsky. We invite you to celebrate the life of a man who loved so deeply, loved his family, loved his friends, his peers, and generally theater. We're going to hear from a number of speakers today. There are those who are not able to be here with us, who have sent English is my fourth language, who've sent speeches to be read because they really want to be noted. And of course, it wouldn't be theater if there wasn't a show, so there'll be some performances. First off, can I just say a warm thank you to not only the Fugard for hosting the memorial service here, but the committee of people who've put together this incredible service. You will notice that the lace that is in the lectern is from Funny Girl, as well as the beading. The mirror balls and the fairy lights are from Lang Arum. And in the front of the stage, we have 10 sets that Saul designed of the 12 that were on the stage at the Fugard for the 10 years that he's been working with this particular stage. So a round of applause, please, for the committee of people who've put this together. We'll hear first from his family. Please welcome on stage Louis Nieberg.
Hello, everybody, and thanks for coming tonight. Today. I don't know why I always think it's the night when I'm inside, yeah? I'm probably the least qualified person to be giving a speech or talking on this stage. Certainly the least talented, but excuse me while I rely heavily on my notes and try and do this the best I can. But what I think I lack in talent, I make up for in my organizational skills. I've got the speech, got the notes, and there is a prop. Sorry, there is a prop. We'll reference this later. So my name is Louis Nieberg, and I'm Saul's second cousin and one of his blood family. So they say blood is thicker than water, but in Saul's case, every single one of you in this room were his real family. All of you in London and scattered around the world, you were his mates, you were his friends, and I'm glad that you're here to commemorate this day. He's left a lot of love all around the world. Speaking of which, I just want to read a quick note from my sister in the States who couldn't be here today. She says, I always remember Saul and Aded too for their incredible generosity, in particular how they opened their home, first in Finchley, London, and later in Cape Town to me over the years. In particular, the way they graciously hosted and cooked Mark's and my pre-wedding Friday night family dinner at their beautiful Tambour's Kloof home in 2005 is a memory I always treasure. Saul actually got my sister her first job at DK in London. So, he was always a guy that would help you out and help anybody out. He was great like that. For me, Saul was many things. One thing in particular, he was the keeper of the family knowledge. Many a visit was spent at his house or in my house, going through the various family members and trying to figure out how they all fit in. I made loads of notes, and I've got the family tree written on A4 paper, and that's something that I would love to pass on to my children. My youngest daughter is here today, Madeline. She is actually Saul's goddaughter, and I think there were 2 other goddaughters. So while he was known as Uncle Saulie in our house, he went by many other names: Liffy, the old bugger, Sonky, and I'm sure there were a lot more that I won't repeat at the moment. I'm going to start this speech at the end, the last 18 years of his life. Talk about dying in the saddle. The night before he passed away, he was right here in this room watching a screening of Midsummer Night's Dream. So, doing the thing that he loved to do in the space that he loved to be. He's got a huge body of work. We can see some of them here. And this place was very special to him. So thank you to Iris, Lemise, Georgia, Carl, and there's a load of you here at the Fugard who put on this production, the lights, the stage, everything. So would have loved the razzmatazz. I don't think it's much of a secret. Saul recently got approval for what will be his final set design, and that's what will be coming to this exact stage pretty soon, called It's Only a Play. The last 18 years of his life. So he woke up the next morning and he did what he always did. He went for a walk with Marga the dog, and he went to the Blue Cafe for a coffee. Now, my mother helped me edit this speech. Thank you, Mom. Did some fact-checking, and she said I must add in Marga the dog. We all know who Marga is. She's right over there, very quiet for a change. So firstly, Marga is fine. Marga's been taken care of. I've had to field this question quite a lot lately. Marga is going to live with his good friend Marina. Thanks also to Marina for everything that you did during his life, and certainly in the last 10 days. She was very involved in putting this all together. So thank you, Marina. So the Blue Cafe, Marga, the dog, Saul, Blue Cafe. It was pretty much his home away from home. He spent most days there, sometimes even going back a second time. And he always had a coffee. Everybody knew him. So I'm very happy to say that Linda and her team, thank you very much, have provided the cakes that we're going to eat afterwards. And there was one cake in particular, a G&T cheesecake that's going to be here. And I think there's a G&T other cake. Sorry, maybe not that organized. My notes have gone a bit awry here. Just on that note, my wife came with my suit. I left it at home this morning in Ruby Castile. I'm afraid the shoes didn't make it. I've got the Crocs, but I'm sure you would have liked it. So just another note on Margot. Margot wasn't the first. There was always a Margot. I think we've seen some pictures on the back here of two Scotties. The first one was Hamish. That was the London dog. And then there was Chrissy. And Chrissy came to Cape Town. Unfortunately passed away as well. And now we have Margot. So there was always a dog. So I said I'm organized now. I'm losing my place in this speech. Got to refer to the notes. So the reason why Saul was, I think, the unofficial taster of the cakes at the Blue Cafe. I think the reason being, obviously, his association with Oded, and developed a huge knowledge for cakes, I guess. But also, as Africa mentioned, it was his quality about his honesty. I mean, he was the most honest man you ever knew. He was a man that would truly call a spade, or rather, in his case, a fucking spade. That was Saul. There's another word that he liked to use. Africa mentioned it. I won't. My children are here. But rhymes with bunt. Starts with a C. And I think this was given to him in hospital. I would like to find out the story about the origins of this. What is surprising to me about Saul's death is that it didn't take place in a hospital. As we know, he certainly had his health issues over the years. Highlights obviously being the heart transplant. So this is actually a memorial for both Saul and Harriet. Harriet the heart, or what he used to say when Harriet met Saulie. But the heart is, it's a used heart. I mean, pretty well used. He had it for 12 years, which I think is some sort of a record. And those are, the 12 years I really probably got to know him the best. So we're very grateful to Willie Kuhn and his amazing team for doing everything they did to give us that extra time with him. Unfortunately, the downside of a heart transplant is having to take all those little pillokies. And in Saul's case, it was quite a daily routine and a massive pills to swallow. And swallow he did. Oded and I, through our business, Oded's Kitchen, used to do some catering for Saul's monthly transplant social, the heart to heart. One day, as I was with him while he was swallowing the pills in the morning, he held up one, calling it by the brand name, and he said, this fucking pill, pays for the whole catering gig. He had a very unique sense of humor. But speaking of hospitals, we had a little tradition. I probably visited Saul in every single hospital in Cape Town, and we used to rate them by the quality of the food. Nobody ever really went higher than a 5. There were other factors, but it was never the medical staff that we were worried about. They were all great. And patched him together many a time. So the tradition was, he one day asked me for a G&T. I think he had been in hospital for a while, and he said, come on, hook me up with a G&T. So I went across the road, found a coffee shop, got a cup, found a bar, poured the G&T into the cup, snuck it out the bar, into the hospital, and it became a bit of a tradition. So we had quite a bit of practice at it, unfortunately. And the last visit now, with the Cargate pneumonia thing, I think we had perfected the system. I pre-bought the drink at a bottle store back home in Ruby Castile, transported it on ice, had an empty Energade bottle, poured it in, obviously matched the blue with the blue and the pink with the pink. Progress. So I'm now going to cut to the beginning of Saul's life. Well, rather, for me, the beginning of Saul in my life. When I first met Saul, he was part of that duo that was Saul and Oded. In fact, for the first few years of my life, or whenever I heard my folks speak about Saul, it was always Saul and Oded, and I actually thought his surname was Oded. I mean, they were inseparable, his partner, friend, soulmate, and the real love of his life. So when I first met Saul and Oded, I was around 10 years old, growing up, Port Elizabeth, Jewish suburbia, and this flamboyant couple just walked into my life. I don't remember too much about it, but I do remember having a conversation with her dad and thinking it a bit strange or a bit odd that a man could be a cook. Cut forward 25 years later, those who don't know me, I set up a business with her dad, cooking, called her dad's kitchen, and I've been cooking for the last 12 years. The other thing about that visit, and I don't really recall too much, but I do remember them smoking a hell of a lot. It turns out what had happened is they had gotten a hold of a pick and pay packet full of dacha and were driving around the country trying to smoke as much of it as they could. Before they flew back to London, apparently they hadn't gone through the whole bag, but I think they did a very good effort at it. Saul had written his memoirs, Saul or Nothing, a process he started after Dad passed away. I think it was some form of therapy for him to get over the death. I mean, it was a huge thing in his life. They were together so long. But it chronicles his life, both personally and professionally. At this stage, it's written in his own voice, or rather, there's not much editing or proofing on it. So it's actually like having a conversation with you. I just want to read a little bit from it, just to set the tone. It's called Memoirs of a, it's called Saul or Nothing, but the first chapter is Memoirs of a Musical's Morphe. 25th of August, 1942, 23:40 p.m., 15 Bilson Street, Etenage. Sorry, I'm a P boy, Uitenaeg to you. The home of my Aunt Edna and Uncle Pam Pamensky in the Eastern Cape. My wonderful mother Toby, Nee Nieberg, open wide, not in the dental sense, and schloop, like a swish of a red velvet curtain with deep, heavy gold fringe. I made my first entrance on this planet without beginners please, standby crew, house lights down, tabs out, go Q1. No overture, not even a chandelier or four, let alone an illuminated staircase complete with folly's feathers, but just to a loud chorus of Mazel Tov, it's a boy. I opened my mouth for the first time. No, not with a rendition of Hello Mommy, but with a shriek, as you too would have done if you saw the most dreadful costume I was wearing. Womb with a view costumiers should be run out of town. It looked like it was made from old cottage cheese, some greasy stuff accented by a few touches of red for effect. Oh, Irene Sharaf, excuse my pronunciation, where were you when I needed you most? I suspect drinking up your creations for Meet Me in St. Louis. This is my story, and I can imagine what I like. There's not much I can really add to that, but if he wrote copious notes, book ended on the bottom. And if I look at the bottom on the first 2 pages, there are, I think, 14 references. There's 1 to cock and 2 to fuck or fucking. So Saul's life can be broken into 3 main phases. Growing up in South Africa and the trials and tribulations that went with his mother divorcing and remarrying, moving from Willemore to PE to Joburg. And then the London years, where he studied and spent most of his life. To the last chunk, the Cape Town retirement years. Although I say retirement, I think he did his best work while he was here in Cape Town. Started teaching a course at UWC, and it was hell of a productive for an old guy. For my family and I, it's this last chunk of his life that was so special, and I'm so grateful. We had loads of family gatherings at his house in Bella Ombre Road. My sister's pre-wedding dinner, and lots of Rosh Hashanah and Pesach Seders. For all of you who are not Jewish, a Pesach Seder is an incredibly long meal, lots of religious stuff, songs, readings, more readings, thankfully a lot of wine. But depending on how religious you are, it can take several hours. And I've been to family members where I've actually fallen asleep at the table, and this is as an adult. At Saul and Aded's house, the religious side took maybe 3 minutes. That was it. And secondly of all, in Jewish circles, you judge the quality of the meal by the consistency of the matzah balls. With Aded doing the cooking, you knew they were good. Okay, I'm going to reach for the high note now. Irreverent, irreligious, but still very Jewish or Jewish. Not known so much for his fashion sense, but still very fashionable. Loved the pashmina. Informed and opinionated, and then some. He was a character and a half and lived a great and fantastic life. He touched so many of us. He knew many famous people, but they were always introduced as just David or Athol or Jan or Pitt. Humble and sincere, and a great loss to all that knew him. I know health and safety won't allow us to have a G&T, but I just want to say, L'chaim, Saul, I love you, we all love you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much for that, Lewis, and we wish you and your family long life. Craig was lucky enough to have his wedding to Peter officiated by the man. And of course, Saul was an incredible support to Craig when he went through a tragedy of his own. And he'd like to render this performance in honor of Saul. Craig.
I'm going to be singing a piece which is appropriately for me and my relationship with Saul a love song. It's an old piece. It was written in what was published in 1602 by Caccini. It's an Italian piece, and I think it's appropriate not only for my relationship with Saul and what he did for Peter and myself, but also for how he lived his life. It was very rooted in love, and it's Valentine's Day, so I thought it just makes sense. I'm not going to use a mic, so you'll have to bear with.
Thank you very much for that, Craig. As indicated earlier, there are a number of people who wish they could have joined us here this afternoon, but because of distance and, I suppose, obligations, they were not able to do so. So what we're going to do next is play you a number of video speeches that have been brought to us. After that, Ronnie Soskoln is his best friend from when he was 5 years old. He sent a message, and his brother Colin is going to be reading from that. Marina Hribno will be reading a couple of messages from friends and peers and colleagues, and then we'll also have Joy Sepika reading a special message as well. We'll start, Colin, if that's okay, we'll start with the videos, and then we'll come to you. Thank you.
In 1975, a meeting was called alerting theatre designers to the probability of incorporation into one of the technical trade unions. During a heated discussion about establishing standard rights, fees and royalties for designers, Ralph Colty revealed a prepared statement of the fees he'd received. Immediately, Saul stood up and declared his earnings for the same level work in the same theatres, which was considerably less. There was a gasp of shock, and very quickly Saul led the proposal to establish the Society of British Theatre Designers. It was a brave and fearless gesture, and a testament to Saul's clear thinking when confusion was reigning. Many were the times when we gathered at the house in North Finchley, always with a great crowd of people who connected with Saul and Oded, and of course a table groaning with wonderful food. Lively conversation went on until the early hours while we tried to sort out the world. When Saul told us they were leaving for Cape Town, we felt we were losing an important part of our cultural life. But Saul and Oded knew it was time to move on and reconnect with Saul's roots. He was hungry for new and different experiences in making theatre that he really cared about. Saul was not only a great theatre designer and teacher, but also a truly great human being. We were friends for many years, as well as professional colleagues. He knew my family, and in a typically generous gesture in 2000, Saul and Oded took on some of the catering when my younger daughter, then a filmmaker, married a Quaker filmmaker. Saul and Oded created a wonderful buffet table based on Oded's book, In Search of Plenty. They created a biblical odyssey of food, and at the same time Saul decorated the venue, assisted by theatre design students and Hamish the dog. Saul never ever forgot a birthday or a Jewish festival, and cards always arrived on time, whether from North Finchley or Cape Town. We all loved him, and Oded, and as we say, we wish you long life.
We've been giggling. We've been laughing at all sorts of silly memories of Saul and Oded in London.
We've got so many.
We have so many.
We kind of feel like, because you've had him for so long in South Africa, you've got all your South African stories, but our stories obviously are London stories. Jane introduced me to the boys.
Yes, long time ago I was Saul's assistant, and then we came back to London. We stayed friends. It became not a work relationship anymore, but a friendship. And then I introduced Jill, and we became a family.
Yeah,
we did, true. Didn't we?
And we have wonderful memories. Obviously, all our memories are connected to Odette as well, who was still around at that time. We always used to say they were the sort of, the couple who'd managed to keep their relationship together better than any of our straight friends, didn't we?
Including us.
Yes, especially. And they were amazing friends to us in so many ways.
So loving, so warm, such hospitality.
Yeah.
Always funny.
Yeah. And they had like a division of labour as well. So Schwartz would be creating messily in the kitchen, and Radomsky would be, we called them Schwartz and Radomsky.
We did.
And they called us Ripley and Fermanovsky,
yes.
Didn't they?
Ripples.
Ripples, yeah. And Saul did the washing up.
That's right. And he designed the kitchens.
Yeah.
He designed the kitchen in Clovelly Grove, and he designed the kitchen in Bel-Ombre as well. I'm sure it's because he just wanted the results of the work it came out of that kitchen.
Yeah. We thought he was going to starve, actudy, when Odette passed.
Well, I did think he was going to starve.
Yeah.
Because after Odette died, and I was there for that fortnight, sadly, everybody very kindly brought round food. And knowing that Saul liked cakes, they all bought chiffon cakes. So we had about 5 chiffon cakes in the fridge, and that was it.
Yeah.
And I had to take him shopping to get some proper nutrition inside. Yeah.
I mean, what can we say? We're with you. We've lost our larger-than-life friend who made one of the best theatrical exits ever, which is our main consolation, isn't it, really? Obviously, we've had a lot of tears as well. But we didn't want to burst into tears on this occasion, and it wouldn't have been appreciated by
no.
Saul. He would have wanted us to be thinking of all the good times.
He would be tutting, wouldn't he?
Yes.
And saying what a fuss.
Yeah, be
Yeah.
positive.
Be positive,
Yeah,
which
that-
he was.
Well, that
always.
was one of his main things to us.
Such a warm friend and able to deliver very straight truths.
Yes.
Yes.
Some
To
of
keep
them
you
were-
on track.
Yes, it could be painful, but they were always honest.
They were always honest and they were always delivered with the warmest and kindest of intent.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. And we are in honour wearing green and orange
Yep.
to represent our favourite guys.
Yeah.
We hope they're together, don't we?
I
We
hope
could
so.
be a little bit romantic about it.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think they should be together now.
Yes.
That
And
would
so,
make them both very happy.
with heartfelt thoughts to all the chummies,
Yes, to all of you.
we're joining you, we're there with you, and we celebrate the great Saul Radomsky.
And we will be thinking about him for a long, 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 long time to come.
Yes.
Not just today.
No.
Hope the celebrations go really well. It should be a celebration with lots of glitter. Lots of sequins.
Oh.
Yes. Loads of gold slash.
And we've both sent in our written pieces as well, so hopefully somebody will read them out for us. They're not too long.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks everybody for organising this, and especially to the Athol Fugard Theatre
Yes.
for recognising. Well, you didn't need much recognising his brilliant talent.
Yeah.
Isn't that right?
And yes, thank you for embracing him and giving him another home in Cape Town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Shall we wave our gloves goodbye then?
Bye.
Bye.
My darling Saul, I can't believe that you've left us, and I'm heartbroken, as are all your other friends who are with you in South Africa. I'm here in Clapham, remembering so well that night when you and Oded met in my flat in Gloucester Terrace, Paddington, for the first time, sometime in the 1970s it must have been, and we've been friends ever since. You are a great artist and a great friend, and I shall miss you. We talked, we sent messages, Facebooking and so on. Thank you for being in my life. Bless you always. Bye.
Saying goodbye to Saul. Sorry, I mixed up my wife, Paula, and Saul. Saying goodbye to Saul is not easy. I had tried to prepare for this occasion by writing a little memoriam, and my wife had tried valiantly to record it using a camera, but I'm afraid that didn't work for obvious reasons. So let me just content myself on this very sad occasion. Sad because there's so much to actually rejoice. It is the 10th birthday of the theatre, in which he worked with such passion, dedication and love. Let me just say that losing him was a loss that the Fugard Theatre and all of us personally, at a personal level, will feel for many, many years to come. In my case, not quite so many. Thank you, Saul, for being the friend and artist, consummate artist you were.
Well, my condolences to everyone. As you've seen in some of the pictures, I'm Ronnie's younger brother, and I'll be representing him in what I'm going to say. These are his notes. Speaking through my brother Colin, I want first to express my deep regret at not being able to be in Cape Town today to directly participate in this celebration of Saul's life. However, it is comforting to know that he has such a great extended family of relatives and very good friends there, people who have enriched his life and made his years back in South Africa fulfilling in so many dimensions. Those are the years in which most of you there today have gotten to know Saul as a mature and accomplished man. So I'll focus my piece on the story of the years leading up to Saul's return to South Africa, and there were many such years. Indeed, Saul and I met in 1948 as 5-year-old classmates in Mrs. McTeer's nursery school in Orange Grove, Johannesburg, and we started a friendship that thrived through ensuing 7 decades. From the get-go, I remember the combination of distinct personality and cheeky wit that characterized Saul throughout his life. He was a big kid, befitting his biblical namesake, who exuded warmth and openness. He liked to laugh from an early age. Irony and teasing became cornerstones of his wit. We shared many interests, but I have him to thank for the development of my interest in art, architecture, theater, and music, many of which became major themes in our respective professional lives. One can't look back on Saul's life without recognizing the profound influence and inspiration provided by his mother, Toby. Toby was a force of nature, made more so by the circumstance she found herself in, unusual for the time, that of a single, working mother of 2 children. Fortunately, she was backed up by a very close, extended family of sisters, nephews, and nieces who, although based in the Western Cape, were frequent visitors to Joburg. Toby subsequently married Harry Kay, who became an affectionate stepfather to both Saul and Thelma. Despite a troubled relationship with his estranged father, which was a source of pain and frustration to Saul throughout his life, he managed to develop the strong and positive values of family and friendship that so shaped his thinking and that we all enjoyed being part of. For example, I remember clearly the many moments of great joy he had when, as a teenager, he played for hours with his then 6-month-old nephew, Bernard. Saul's passion for theater design manifested early. I recall being roped in to his set painting team in Standard 4 to work on the student production of The Mikado, of which, of course, he was the 10-year-old set designer. Even at that age, Saul's approach to design showed sophistication. He would explain, "It's Oriental, so it's false," to anyone that questions his abstractions or his heightened use of color. That interest in stage design went on through high school in productions of Macbeth, Hamlet, Pygmalion, and Blood Wedding. The rest is history. Saul and I were in the same class through all of our primary and high school years. We both opted to study art instead of Latin in high school, and we worked together on all of those school drama society productions. Saul as designer and me as business manager and small part actor. We hung out at record stores developing our interest in jazz and regularly frequented the movies. Over the years, we graduated from Saturday morning cowboy flicks and comic swapping at the Royal Biscope to much posher art house film society presentations at the downtown Piccadilly and the Monte Carlo. In our teenage years, Christmas holidays in Cape Town were a particularly fun experience shared by a close-knit group of friends to which we both belonged. Saul was a character in the best sense of the word. He had a clear sense of who he was and what his values were, combined with a distinct personality and style. He had strong opinions on many subjects and his own way of expressing them, yet he managed to operate in the world with love, integrity, and mostly good humor. As with his career calling, his gay identity manifested relatively early. Where most of his peers struggled in the closet for many years, Saul confronted it boldly. After graduating as an art teacher, he departed Johannesburg for London to pursue studies in theater design. But the other item on his agenda was to give himself the space he needed to pursue on his own terms his full identity as a human being. When Saul returned briefly to South Africa to attend my wedding in 1967 in Johannesburg, our first private conversation included him letting me know that he was living his life as a gay man. A couple of years later, my wife Jean and I moved to London, where we spent a great year with Saul, attending lots of plays and in meeting and getting to know his wonderful circle of colleagues and friends of both the just good as well as the more than just good variety. Jean and I also shared in the excitement of the landmark steps forward that he was making in his stage design career. Saul and my paths diverged again when Jean and I left for Canada. But we kept in close touch, including designating him as godfather of our firstborn, Sarah. Over the next few years, we exchanged several visits across the pond, a few of which were to attend the opening of his increasingly major commissions at some increasingly major theaters. It was on one of the earlier of these visits that I met Oded, the newly discovered love of his life. Most of you knew and loved Oded and understood the extraordinary bond they developed in their lives together, so I won't dwell on that. They created 2 beautiful homes in London, both featuring great professional kitchens where Oded would practice his trade, and a wonderful dining area featuring that circular table lit by the exquisite stained glass chandelier that hung above it. We all remember the great meals Oded would cook and share with ever-changing groups of friends and family, local and from abroad. Their early days together were bookmarked by Oded making forays into the food industry to find ways to monetize his great culinary talent, and Saul continuing to design shows in and around London, as well as in Europe. One of the great developments in Saul's life was meeting David Kramer and working on the early London production of Cat and the Kings. I don't have to tell you how that went, or how the professional relationship and friendship between David, Renee, and Saul blossomed over the ensuing decades. Back to London, where, ever his mother's son, he made time for doing socially good work. For many years, he spent a night each week being available on a helpline for young gays contemplating suicide. Saul and Oded were great touchstones for me in dealing with the sea change that was going on in my life in the mid-1970s, the dissolution of my marriage to Jean and my own coming out. Shortly thereafter, I journeyed to London to introduce Saul and Oded to Howard, the then new and now 45-year-long love of my life. Howard and Oded, with their shared passion for cooking, bonded strongly, and we all became fast friends. I had the good fortune to have a job that for several years took me to London on a regular basis. So between those visits and Saul and Oded's reciprocal visits to Toronto to attend various family simchas, we managed to stay in fairly close touch. In fact, Oded catered Howard's son's bar mitzvahs in Toronto. 3 memorable high points of Saul's career while in London, and which we were able to share, were the premieres of A Little Hotel on the Side at the National Theatre, Mooney Shapiro's Songbook on Broadway, and Cat and the Kings, both in the West End and on Broadway. The parties following each of them was an opportunity for his nearest and dearest to celebrate his growing success, including friends and colleagues in London, and most significantly for Saul, his mother, who also doubled as his staunchest fan. She would fly in from Johannesburg for each of them. All of these productions were great artistic accomplishments. But Mooney Shapiro's Songbook was a catastrophe. I'll never forget the moment when all of us were gathered at Sardi's, awaiting it with great anticipation, and we read the hot off the presses New York Times review. As fate would have it, the reviewer had a giant chip on his shoulder about British musicals presuming to come to Broadway, and mercilessly panned the show. It never reopened. By the time the millennium rolled around, Saul had suffered his first heart attack, and he and Oded decided that they were ready for a new phase of their lives outside of the United Kingdom. A few years before that, Saul's sister and her extended family had moved to Toronto to be joined there by his mother, Toby. Saul and Oded focused on Toronto as the place to which to relocate. They spent 3 frustrating years trying, without success, to gain admission to Canada. Ultimately, and to my and Howard's great disappointment, but what I believe to have been both their and Cape Town's great gain, they established themselves in Tambour's Kloof. I will end my story there and let others fill in the missing pieces. The way Saul lived his life, fully and unapologetically true to himself, but with humility and love, is an example to all of us. He was a superb designer, a forceful gay crusader, a wonderful son, a loving spouse, and most significantly to me, a great friend. I will miss him profoundly. Thank you.
Margot just got caught in between the seat and the backrest, and we're just trying to sort that out.
Not what I was before the war. Hello everyone, and thanks for being here. It would have meant so much to Saul. I think he would have loved this. I can just hear him. Okay, I have 2 tributes that I was asked to read. The one is from Jane Ripley, whom you already saw in the video. I don't know what happened to Jill's one. It might be, but it didn't come my way. So this is what Jane wrote. For Saulie, with tremendous love and affection from Jane Ripley. After 46 years of friendship, it's difficult to say goodbye. Like so many of us, I'm sure, I simply cannot believe that Saul is gone. I will never forget his wonderful loyalty and friendship, his wisdom delivered with deadly swift accuracy and scathing toe-curling humor, his steadfast kindness, his eagle eye for detail in everything, and his absolute passion for his work and for the power of theatre. He interviewed me for the post of his assistant at the North Theatre all those years ago at his basement flat in Gladys Road, West Hampstead. Apparently I got the job because as I arrived, the first thing he saw through the basement window were my bright yellow patent platform shoes, and he was fascinated that I even made it down the stairs. I learned so much from him there and ate so many jelly babies and so many cream teas at Newton Poppleford. The servings were so generous there that even Saul could not finish the lashings of cream. The tea place is still going, and I shall visit it later this year with other friends for a very particular celebration of his wonderful life. Friendship with Saul did not just involve wonderful design, as you must know. It definitely involved cakes and laughter. They've already spoken about the cakes. His standard greeting always when visiting was, "Never mind the dinner ripples, what's for pudding?" And we all know how much he loved his dessert. All those years spent with him and Oded were full of chocolate cakes, chocolate mousse, jam tarts, chiffon cakes, my raspberry linzer tortes, Jill's granadilla cakes, birthday cakes, and bowls of sweeties, all hilariously enjoyed with the kindest and best of friends. It was always Saul and Oded. They were inseparable until recent years, and I hope they are together again now. That would make them both very happy. My daughter Tammy, from being a tiny child, always regarded Saul and Oded as her aunties, and it was a sad day for London when she gave them a lift to the airport for their move to Cape Town. They left for the life they had dreamed of, and we were all very happy to know that they were so totally embraced by a wonderful family of friends there, particularly at the Fugard. In his last email to me, Saul finished his message with, "Getting better, nobody died." So perhaps we can take him at his word and cling to the idea that as long as people talk about someone, they are not really gone. We will all talk about Saul for decades to come, and he will live on in wonderful, glittering tales. They must, of course, be glittering. How could they be anything else? Okay, the other one I was asked to read is also someone who would have loved to be here, and that is Alan Swerdlow. Swerds and Saul talked every Saturday morning, and I was privileged to attend one or two very long dinners with them and a bottle of whiskey and lots of gin and tonic, and their stories were amazing. Alan writes, "It was in London in the 70s and 80s, in the days when a poor young actor could actually afford cheap seats for West End plays, that the name Saul Radomsky kept popping up in the programs as designer of many of the shows I went to see. I mean, Saul Radomsky. It wasn't a name that was forgettable, certainly not in the smooth, bland Anglo-Saxon, even surface of reticence that cloaked British theatre. I somehow knew he was South African or of South African origin. There may have been a reference in Plays and Players magazine, which was essential reading for us in those days. One-time matinee idol, James White, who was Saul's school chum, introduced it at one of Jimmy's famous Saturday lunches when Saul was paying a visit to his family. So began my alternative education at the hands of Saul, far better than any formal education I had received. His incredibly incisive mind could see what worked or didn't work in a production, instantly. He had an infallible bullshit detector that could cut through any amount of waffle, and he taught me how to use it. He taught me that reticence had no value and how to speak my mind. He also taught me that honesty was the best policy, but only if you had a good lawyer on speed dial. And then Saul taught me a storehouse of Yiddish profanities that I never knew existed and for which I will ever be grateful. Actually, his command of English profanity was equally expert, and he would use both languages with impeccable timing and appropriate flourishes. Irascible, loving, opinionated, caring, indignant, gentle, concerned, and often infuriating. Saul was the embodiment of the word bench. I shall miss our Saturday morning Twitch sessions on the telephone when we took the world apart and then put it back together again. I shall miss his laugh and his indignation at any wrongdoing or slight, and I shall miss getting nicely pissed with him on gin and tonics. In fact, that's what I'm drinking right now in Johannesburg. L'chaim, Soli, don't get your knedels in a twist. And that was Alan. I would like, if Africa will allow me, just quickly to tell you, you all know that Saul and I spent a lot of time together. But one of my favorite memories, which I think a lot of people might not know about him, is that annually there's a celebration at the St. George's Cathedral in which they have a Thanksgiving which is attended by donor families and donor recipients. Organ recipients, sorry. Saul would go there regularly, every single year. And what they do there is a donor family gets chosen to light the big candle, and from that, all the other candles are lit in the cathedral and for the people who are there. Saul would sit quietly to one side, and you know how Saul had this way of being viscerally affected by emotion. When he saw a particularly bad piece, his whole body would sort of go like this, and I would think, Saul, sit up straight, please. Don't show them how you feel. But there it was particularly moving because I know he was so grateful for Harriet. We celebrated, Harriet was his heart, and because it was a girl's heart, he called her Harriet. And we would celebrate Harriet every year that he had her. And my question to him would be, have you fed Harriet? In other words, have you had all those little tablets? But seeing him there in that cathedral, a person who was not religious, but being thankful and grateful that he had an extra 12 years to give, and he felt a particular responsibility to make something of the time that he was given by someone who lost their life and gave him his heart. And what you see here was Saul's way of giving back. Thank you.
Hi, I'm going to read a short message from Jill Firmanovsky. I think I've been asked to read this because we were all part of a North London artsy gang from the late 70s in London. And Jill, for those who don't know her, was the foremost rock photographer in working out of the UK. And if you ever see photographs of Pink Floyd or the Pretenders or the Police or Oasis, they have been taken by Jill. And Jill and Saul had a very, very close friendship. And although she said a lot of what she says in her note here on her audio, on her video, I'll just repeat what she said. Like all his chummies and family, I've been trying to take on board that our dear Saulie has left us. The only compensation is that he went the way he did, surely one of the greatest theatrical exits ever. Saul's support for my work and my life generally will stay with me forever. But then he was the most positive friend I ever had. No matter what life threw at him, and it certainly flung a heap of shite his way, he just got on with it and made the best of everything with his all-encompassing catchphrase, be positive, simple and wise. Oded never really left him, and after his passing was an unseen companion at his side at every star-spangled opening and award ceremony. Not forgetting Toby, his mum, and biggest fan, who kept cuttings on her golden son throughout her life. Not many people get to live such a full and creative life. Sure, he pissed off quite a few folks, mainly those whose egos needed a poke. And he could be as rude as hell, but caustic Saul was part of his unique chemistry. Without it, he wouldn't have had the means to cut through the crap and produce such extraordinary and beautiful work. Like Marmite and Anchovette, you either loved or hated Saul Radomsky. I loved him, and so did you. His memory will rock on.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Joy. Thank you, Marina. And thank you, Colin, for reading those messages. Aviva Pelham needs no introduction whatsoever, and she will serenade us now. David Kramer is probably one of those lucky enough in Cape Town to have worked the most with Saul, creating a few of those sets on the stage for the talent that had been cast to either perform or sing or say the words written by this great man. He has a few words to say. David.
So, Saul told me a few things, and I'm just going to start with a story that I really loved when he told it to me. Saul's love affair with the liggies and the glitz and all things theatrical began when Boswell's circus came shunting into that mecca of the entertainment world, De Aar in the Groot Karoo. His parents owned the hotel De Aar and just across the railway station. And Saul was about 3 or 4 when he was taken across to the train to see what all the excitement was about. And there he was startled to see a man not much bigger than himself, a Tikkie the clown. And Tikkie shoved his garishly made-up face into Saul's. He was so close that Saul could smell the grease paint and the mustiness of the circus costume. Scared out of his wits, he turned and ran, not knowing that this was the beginning of a lifelong fascination with the world of make-believe. After matriculating, Saul enrolled at the Johannesburg School of Art and Design, and he financed his studies by selling diamond rings at Stearns Jewelers, and also working in the hardware department at OK Bazaars. Later, when he took a career aptitude test, his knowledge of hammers and screwdrivers suggested that he should become a carpenter. But in 1965, he headed off to London, where he was able to study under the famous Ralph Cortai at the Central School of Art. How he achieved this, I'll never know, but I do have a vague suspicion that he had a matchbox full of Stearns diamond rings in his pocket. After working at the Northcote Theatre in Exeter and the Hampstead London Theatre in London, his first West End production was a Tennessee Williams play starring Elaine Stritch. In London, he worked with Ronald Harwood, Albert Finney, Vanessa Redgrave, and Charlton Heston. Saul designed numerous productions in the UK, the West End, Broadway, Israel, Australia, India, and South America. In South Africa, he won the F&B Vita Award for Cut and the Kings and the Fleur de Cup for Birdwatchers and Clybourne Park. His nominations include Die Laaste Karretjie Graf, Shadow of the Hummingbird, Songbook, Some Like It Fraught. He also designed the Train Driver, Bad Jews and Funny Girl at the Fugard, and entrance and exits at the Baxter. I met Saul in Cape Town in 1977 when he came to investigate the possibilities of returning to South Africa. My advice was relocating to Cape Town would not be a good idea, as there was hardly enough work to go around. And I didn't think I'd see him again. But only a few months later, Cut and the Kings was invited to the Tricycle Theatre in London, and when director Nicholas Kent saw my rather inadequate set, he said, "There's only one man who can fix this for you." And the next day, Saul arrived. With just a few pieces of red rope and some glitter, he quickly applied his magic touch and saved the day. Our musical attracted the attention of London producers, and when we were offered a West End run, it was Saul who revamped the show for the Vaudeville Theatre. What had started out as a tiny production that we could pack into a Venter Wynkie and a Volksie bus became a full-scale, large production with a set that required 2 Pantechnicon trailers when it toured. This was the beginning of our friendship and a wonderful artistic partnership. He designed the revival of District 6, the musical, Orpheus in Africa, and District 6, Canalla. Our last project together was Langarm at the Fugard Theatre, which was set in the fictional Canterbury Hotel. And whenever I looked at that evocative set, I was always reminded that Saul's early years in Daar were spent in a hotel much like the one we saw on stage. I enjoyed working with Saul, and I loved being in his company. He had a wicked sense of humor, as we've heard, and he could be outspoken at times. When we were up against a deadline, he would like to say, "Art takes a little longer." So I'm so glad that he didn't listen to my advice in 1977 and that we were able to work together for so many years. I'm glad that Harriet, his heartthrob, kept him alive long enough for him to be honored by the Fleur de Cap panel with a Lifetime Achievement Award last year. And I'm so glad that he bumped into Tiki the Clown in Daar all those years ago.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. Celebrated poet Brayton Breitenbach, a day following the news of the death of Saul, penned a poem for him, and he's going to read it now. Brayton.
I suppose we all agree that a sign of the extent to which a person has touched a life or the lives of so many people would be to have this gathering of friends and distant relations, people who didn't know him all that well, but who saw the worth and who saw the depth and who responded to it. I think in my case, it would be recognizing perhaps one of ours, one of us. And if I had to define that one of ours or one of us, it would be a long story, because it would include all kinds of marginals and people crossing borders and perhaps people sleeping outside and having a hard time and making the best of it. People in the best of senses making believe that it's worth doing it. Thank you, David, to this reminder of that wonderful word, which I don't think can be translated, make-believe, the make-believe world. Gedachtig aan Paul Radomsky, who lived in Belle Ombre Street, and that was how our last conversation started, Belle Ombre being, as you know what it means. And I was asking him whether they also had this wonderful light at this side of the mountain. And we were talking about shadows. Little did I know that it was perhaps a kind of a premonition. This was a few days before his death. Hij het in Belle Ombre Straat gewoond en toen naar die illusie van diepe schaduwees verhuis. Daar sak die gordijn, trek 'n laken oor die nag van sein en gaan die pyn se skyn van alledaglig binne. Om een keer die asem diep in te neem, al die geure en ruimtes van bestaansklanke, wat die mens ook ooit kon verbeel met alles wat heel een is, om die longe te vul, innig te hou en te laat gaan, en te laat gaan is gelykstaande aan 'n al een lewe. 2 keer is reeds een te veel vir die son se begeerte, vir die maan se taan, vir die lewe om mens van die dood te vervreem. Kyk, wit ingesout vir water, 'n maan in die aandende oseaan. The poem continued. One was strangely reminded, I was reminded, not having known him well enough, and I'm not sure anybody really can know anybody well enough, and being comforted by the words of Leonard Cohen, stick with the surface. Well, the surface is fine. Saul, de aar. Uit vergangen se tyd gebore in de aar. Miskien net genoeg gesien om die dood te gewaar, pavaan in die theater van illusies, om die gehoor te mesmerise en nou weer ondergeduik in die bron van alle lewe, waar tyd geen gang het nie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brayton. We'll now open up an opportunity for a maximum of 3 people in the auditorium who'd love to celebrate and remember this great man. I'm limiting it to 3 simply because if I don't, we'll sit here until Sunday morning. Let me also tell you that there's a book that we have placed in the foyer, and we're going to ask you to take a few moments to just write down your thoughts, just a few memories of how you choose to celebrate him, so that we can have that in prosperity. If you have the microphone, good sir, can we get the house lights just a little bit so that we can, thank you.
Excuse me. A standing joke when I met Saul at every... A standing joke when I met Saul at every opening night was, "Percy, where were you born?" And I say, "Benoni." And he said, "Well, I was born in DR." And it went on for years and years and years. Saul was not a religious person, but he never forgot that he was of the Jewish faith. What he did when he did bad Jews, I saw that in one of the rooms that were upstairs, he put a mezuzah. Now that is a scroll of the Jewish law that has to be in every Jewish household. I sometimes had, when we had Yom Kippur, which is the most holy day of the Jewish faith, we fasted for 26 hours, and Graham and I used to entertain about up to 30 people to break the fast. And about 15 years, Saul and Oded came to our house, and a couple of years ago I had the sad time with Saul there to say that Oded had passed away. But Oded was our caterer, and since then Graham has taken over. What do I want to say? I can't read what I'm writing. Saul was very generous with us and invited us to dinner at his home, thank you. And Oded cooked very special evenings. His years with Oded were so special, he had difficulty in coping when Oded passed away. I was lucky to see some of his set designs before the show, and the attention to detail was incredible. He actually, when you saw some of the sets today and saw them on the stage, you couldn't believe the trouble and detail he went to see that everything was absolutely superb. When Oded heard that Graham and I were going to Lithuania to see the graves of my late father's family, of whom had been executed in the Holocaust, he said, "Please look for a Lithuanian cookbook in English." Well, we went from shop to shop. Nobody knew what I was talking about. But in Vilnius, we found a bookshop. And the lady never understood my request, but she moved me to the books shelf. And I looked and I looked and looked and took some books away. And what did I find? Lithuanian Jewish cooking in English. And when we brought it back to Oded, he was so moved, and he could not believe that this book had been found. I don't think I've ever seen Saul and Adele so happy. We saw Saul after his accident, but he never thought this would be our last time. When we went to 2 opening nights this week, we looked and because every time we went to an opening night, the first person we saw was Saul in his inimitable dress code. And for the last 2 opening nights, he wasn't there. God bless.
Thank you, Percy. Thank you. Do we have another person with a microphone? I think that's all. As indicated, we have a book in the foyer, and you're most welcome to note a few memories that you'd like to celebrate Saul with. Let's welcome back David Kramer, this time alongside Bianca Flanders, to perform a song from Orpheus in Africa. An amazing production.
Proud old theater, you have seen so many shows. You've heard the green room echoing with warm arpeggios. You've seen how some shows fly while others flop and die. But all shows end, and so, dear friend, we've come to say goodbye. I'm leaving. I'm leaving. You were good to me, but now no more backstage doors, no more loud applause, no more playing to the crowd. I'll say goodbye while my eyes are dry and take my final bow. Never thought there'd come a time when we would not be young. You and I shone bright as lime when our song had just begun. Now our youthful years have disappeared, and your chandeliers sag with crystal tears. I'm sorry, but I have to go, my dear. I'm leaving. I'm leaving. The stalls are empty now, so that's my cue to say adieu. But I've always known somehow that the time would come and they'd beat the drum, and I'll take my final bow.
David Wadilove is going to give the official thanks and make a very important announcement. And I think his announcement needs to be the last thing that sits and resonates with the room. So let me do what I'm supposed to do, which is to invite you to the foyer afterwards for some gin and tonic, some wonderful tea and coffee. And every time he appears in your memory, just smile for Saul. David.
I think it's right that the last word should be Saul's. So when Saul made his Vleerder Cup Lifetime Achievement Award acceptance speech, he was 15 minutes into it when there was resounding applause, which then David converted into a standing ovation, and that was the end of his speech. But at that stage in his speech, he had only got as far as the completion of his studies. He hadn't got to a debt, he hadn't got to the West End, he hadn't got to his London friends, his second heart, and his time back here in Cape Town. So I could use another half an hour to complete that speech for him, but I won't. It's probably the closest that one can come to an Oscar acceptance speech, so we'll keep it strictly down to 3 minutes. And what I would like to do is just, I think on behalf of Saul, just convey some thanks. I think I've been coming to this theatre now for 5 years. As Saul's opening night date, and I've come to know a lot of the people in this theatre. And I think Saul would want to thank the theatre world generally, which gave him such purpose in his life. He'd want to thank the people he worked with and the people he watched and admired. He'd want to thank the Fugard for giving him a second home in Cape Town, and for the many people associated with this and the other theatres who became an extended family to him. I walked into this theatre today and I saw Radomsky. And then I did a double check and I realized it was Manny Manham. But then I looked beyond Manny and I saw Saul, because his spirit permeates this place, and he talks to all of us. And he talks to us also through the sets that he designed and the memories we have. And one of his constant worries was the need to develop a new generation of set designers, of costume designers. Where were the theatre sound engineers going to come from? And so I'm pleased on this the occasion of the celebration of his life and the tribute, to announce that we've now, in his memory, established a legacy fund. Every one of you has received one of these programs. On the back of it are some banking details. We've already received some significant contributions to that. And the purpose of that fund is to fund internships for young people wanting to come into the theatre. So my hope in initiating this fund is that it will grow to the point that it can serve as a lasting tribute to this lovely man. I would also just like to say that in lieu of a consecration and in accordance with his wishes, his body has been cremated and his ashes will be scattered at Big Bay in Blouberg. As there will not be a consecration, that will happen on the 31st of January next year, and all of you are welcome. I think then finally, there's one final word of thanks that is due. And those thanks are my own, but I guess I speak for all of us in thanking Saul for the part he played in our lives. Thank you.
Mademoiselles, you and me, pal. Second bottle, she looks for me. Bonnet flapping, yapping, roof, chicken, pastry. Yes, she looks for me. Good. Let her look for me to tell me why she left me, as I always knew she would. I had thought she understood. I have never understood, and no reason that they should. But if anybody could,